Hikmat.
I think there were two questions. First was the non-violent and Gandhi and Martin Luther King. And the person that I think was probably the most qualified and eminently suited to do all of that is the president. He graduated from, got a master's degree in India, and his greatest mentor is Gandhi himself. And that sometimes happens to be the problem in Afghanistan, because people criticize him for being so soft and for making sure that, he gives peace a chance. At many different conditions, he's always creating this consensus, and this is at times the problem. And particularly, I think, while he would want to do this, I think given the various non-state actors, including Al-Qaeda, including these various other players, I'm not sure if that's a feasibility at this stage. Tell me how it ends. This is almost like a song, How do the Taliban, what state do they see themselves? The reality at this stage is that the Taliban on various different levels, they're a very tired force on several different levels. And they have very much expressed on various levels a desire to communicate, a desire to start a dialogue. Now, about a year ago, if anyone of us would have said negotiation, or dialogue, the Bush administration didn't want any of that. It was not prepared for it. It just didn't care for it. Now, at least the administration is ready for it, but it's still, there's two pillars when it comes to negotiation within Afghanistan. There's a pillar of reintegration, which wants to take the foot soldiers, and then there's the pillar of reconciliation, which talks about the leadership, the shuras, and the top individuals. We have no problem when it comes to reintegration. The problem really comes to when it's the issue of reconciliation is discussed. What are you going to do with the top leadership, and how are they going to come? So international consensus, particularly within Afghanistan and the United States, is needed. On the issue of the constitution, particularly, I discussed this yesterday, and I think some people found this quite a radical idea. And I told them, I said, look, if we're going to negotiate, if we're going to start a dialogue, you cannot set conditions, you cannot set red lines. You go into discussions, and then once you sit down discussions, once you're sitting across the table, then each side sets its parameters and its red lines. For the Afghan government and for the Afghan society, very clearly we said, look, no concessions on territory, no concessions on human rights and women's rights and things like that. But if you start setting conditions saying, accept the Afghan constitution, the moment you start saying that, accept the Afghan constitution, the opposite side is going to come to you and says, well, that's your condition. Our condition is that all the foreign forces have to leave. Then what do we do? So those are the ideas that we're putting forth, and hopefully policymakers will take them.
Thank you. Audrey.
Well, I would only say that the outcome depends in part on what we do, what the Afghan government does. It's a dynamic. It's not a situation that's going to evolve all by itself without reacting to exactly what we do in between now and the end. But that being said, in my personal opinion, the political outcome that we want is negotiations and a political settlement. But historically speaking, looking at this case in a kind of a broader picture, I think it has to be said that there's at least a possibility that it could end in a kind of a civil war.
Yeah.
Shiraz, you recently traveled to the tribal areas. What was your impression there, how it will end?
I was just about to make this point. I mean, sort of dissenting a little bit from the view that's prevalent at the moment. Negotiation, I think, is being presented as this idea that, well, the premise first that negotiations will succeed, but B, that there'll be something that lasts. You only need to look at the difficulty the Pakistani state has had with entering into negotiations with the Tehreek-e-Taliban, Pakistan, and the fact that there have been over 7 different peace agreements in the last few years. They don't last, they keep breaking down, and to be honest, the level and the terms of trade that the Pakistani state is setting down for the Tehreek-e-Taliban, Pakistan, is very, very basic. I can't imagine the United States or Britain negotiating with the Taliban in Afghanistan anywhere near as so softly as the Pakistani state has. So if we bring them to the table, I'm just not so optimistic that we will produce anything tangible, and even if we do, whether it will be preserved and whether it will last. And just to give you a final point, I mean, even the exact area where I was in the tribal areas in Bajor, It had been declared safe. There was a peace agreement there, which had been in existence for about 2 weeks before I arrived. And just the other day before I came here, so it's only been in effect for maybe 6 or 7 weeks, 30 soldiers from the Pakistani army were ambushed and killed. So these things seem to me to be very tenuous and very delicate, and I'm just not so optimistic, which I'm sorry to...
Well, maybe one of the key outcomes from this session is we don't quite yet know how it will end, but according to Audrey, most terrorism does end at some point. So thank you all the panelists for contributing to this session.